Hey everybody, welcome back to the Origins Summit. I am here with Scott Murray of Edge of Urban Farms, who was the delightful face we saw in the movie doing some of the farming, talked about agroecology and some of those cool new concepts that are cool new old concepts that are coming back with old meets new and everything sane in between. Scott, welcome.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So you are a very fun gentleman to talk to because you're not only just super well read and articulate, you get out there and you get your hands dirty and you kind of got the best of both worlds. And so I have a lot of fun discussing concepts with you because you really do get the meta, but you get it from the position of someone who's down in the trenches and feeling the soil and feeling the earth. So this will be a lot of fun, and I look forward to teasing out how we can get people more connected with home gardening in our talk today.
Well, I think home gardening is a piece of the puzzle of connecting people more directly with the food they're eating, and it is the basic building block of our health. Having a great diet that's fortified with nutrients allows our bodies to do the work that they're designed to do, and then presents us going forward. And eating is really the only solution. I found myself talking to one of my daughter's girlfriends last night, who is what I call a diet very specific person. She's a tiny little bird and pecks at little bits of carbohydrates, and she was telling me she's been sick for a month, and in 35 days she's going to go to New Zealand for a month. And I was like, okay, how can we get you healthy? And so I was gently suggesting to her that maybe you need to eat some more protein, some building blocks for your body. And it's so critical, It's like, well, I eat protein once a week. And I'm thinking your body's trying to tell you something.
Yeah, and you're lucky you're young, because if not, you wouldn't even be able to walk around. So how did you get into this? Let's get into your backstory real quickly. Like, were you born into a farming family?
No, actually, I was born into what I would call a survivalist family. My mother grew up during the Depression in Salt Lake City, and they survived because they had a 2-acre lot and had a very big garden. They had animals, they had bees, and they traded with their neighbors. So the woman down the street who had lost her husband and had 9 kids would come and work in the garden 3 days a week for half a day, but she'd go home with a big basket full of food and some eggs so she could feed her children. So that's where my mom came from, and my dad was an architect. So I had the great pleasure of growing up in a house that my dad designed and built, but there was a vegetable garden in the backyard, and that was my mom's practice, and I got so involved with it as a kid, both on the hard work end of pulling the weeds, but on the end of being able to have a great tomato or have something else that is really extraordinary to eat in my home. And my mom was a health food fanatic. It was baking whole wheat bread from wheat she'd ground, and nutrients, and having me eat kelp pills when I was a kid. Made me crazy when I was a kid, but now as an adult, I use kelp in all of my farming to bring those trace elements that we need into the plants.
So I've been to one of your farms and also your kind of home farm. And you are also, we're going to share some bonus video with everyone of you coming out and consulting and turning around my house, turning it into a home garden. And man, you've got all kinds of food growing in your universe. And there's, besides the chickens running around and all that, I mean, I saw kale, I saw fruit trees and all of it. How long did it take you to really turn into a farmer from a home gardener? Like, you've actually made a career choice around this.
Well, when I was in my 20s, I went to UC Santa Cruz, and they had a program there that's now become the chair of agroecology, but it was called the Garden Farm Project. And I really resonated with that. I was in the School of Business and Education, but spent as much time as I could getting to know how the farm worked there. And I made half of my income required to fund my college by growing in 3 locations around Santa Cruz. So I made a very quick transition from what I was able to do at home to recognizing that I needed other income sources as a college student that were flexible. I worked nights as a waiter, and I had these 3 gardens going, and I sold to chefs. So I very early on fell in love with how putting that seed in the ground turns into something extraordinary. And then when people bite into that they have just a transformative experience and want more.
That's fantastic. And now you farm for a living. Now you consult with a number of famous people, and have been doing farms for musicians and people that are funding this because they see it. I know you have some rich European people that fly in every year and say, look, we want to have our organic garden ready for our summer and all that. And it's become this wonderful thing on one side of kind of the elite who can afford to have organic, but you're also doing all kinds of school projects and getting this type of produce into environments where people need it the most, particularly our young people, and educating them about where food comes from. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I've always been a fan of education. In my work at UC Santa Cruz, I was in the School of Education, so I was developing my skills to be a teacher, though I didn't pursue that as my primary path. When I was finished at UC Santa Cruz, I just started right into farming. But I've always been involved in education. And one of the key concepts that is frightening about what's going on with our children in schools is some of the health indicators. And the average here in California for a grade school child is 33% of our grade school kids are obese. Now that's beyond overweight, that's obese, and 1/3. And in some school districts that I visit, there have as much as 50% kids in the obese column. And it's not that these children aren't getting food, they're getting an imbalance of food that is adding to their weight rather than feeding their health. And one of the most alarming things in my work in education, I've also taught at 2 different high schools where we started organic garden programs as both a vocational program and an educational program. And what we see is in our teenage population right now, extraordinary numbers of onset of adult diseases. Just in my last year at the last high school I taught at, I had 2 students, 16 and 17, that became adult onset diabetics. And I had an 18-year-old student that had hypertension. And, I'm the guy close to 60 at that point that should have been the one that was the candidate for hypertension, but it was actually an 18-year-old boy, which is mind-boggling, and it's diet-related. So this concept in education that I've been working with is teaching food literacy, because we need the children to have to understand what it is they're putting in their bodies and to make informed choices. And right now we kind of have advertising literacy for our youth population, and part of that's connected to the television. That it's a medium where the participants are kind of a captive group, so the advertisers can stimulate you with the great images of having this wonderful food, but they're not really telling you the story of that food. The foods that can afford advertising tend to be processed and value-added foods that have very low cost of ingredients, but a very high cost of the value added. So you don't see many ads on television for, the carrot. Go out and grab one. It's a complete meal. You don't need to do anything. You can eat it raw, maybe brush the dirt off.
There's no money to be made on that.
Well, it just is not the thing right now that's driving the educational focus. Mm-hmm. So my involvement with school gardens And I've been supporting those at especially at the elementary level, because the early education of children is critical. Very early on, exposing them to just something wonderful like a carrot right out of the ground, or a sugar snap pea that has extraordinary flavor, or a tomato or a cucumber, they go, wow, this is really good, you know. And we need to get that literacy developed amongst our youth, because literally their lifespan, as we've heard recently, our children will have a shorter lifespan than we will, based on the statistics. And the statistics are pretty scary. The head of the State Department of Public Health here in California, the former one, was a good friend of mine, and he said he'd gone from practicing medicine to practicing statistics. And he called me up one day when he had the second 300-pound 8-year-old that showed up on the California statistics. And he said, you know, this is a crisis when we have an 8-year-old child that weighs 300 pounds, and that child is on a lifetime path for all sorts of challenges. They may, as you said earlier, be young enough that they could bounce back faster than an older person.
Maybe, hopefully, but the cost to but the cost to society and the cost to that child, you know, just psychologically is something that you can't even look at on a spreadsheet, and it's just pain, it's suffering, and it's unnecessary for obvious reasons. So I really want to dive into agroecology and talk about what that means for the future, because I mean, we can kind of inherently understand that we should probably not poison our children and educate them to you know where food goes. But I don't think most adults know where food comes from. And so, you know, organic versus agro versus all of these words, these buzzwords that we hear. I mean, you're our farmer, man. So I'd love, you know, I'd love for you to kind of educate us on what these things even do in the lexicon.
Right. Well, think about it as a historical timeline. You know, prior to World War II, we pretty much had agriculture on a very old model, thousands of years of practice and principles that had been learned. Fertility was from a farm that was diversified. Most small farms in the United States up till the 1940s had both grains and a vegetable garden and animal crops, and they used the animal crops to fertilize the vegetable gardens and the grain crops, and there was a small ecosystem on that farm. At the end of the war, we modernized because our dynamics had changed. And one of the things that we had way too much of was anhydrous ammonia, which was made to make bombs. And they found out that that nitrogen compound also could be used in agriculture, and that when we fed the corn crop with this practically elemental nitrogen, it boosted the growth of the corn crop. However, over time, that was more like giving it a stimulant, like a methamphetamine. It wasn't really a meal for that crop, because when you feed a crop, you not only feed the plant itself, but you feed the soil. And this is where we've had now the evolution of the organic movement, as we've rediscovered that our strength of our food's nutrition comes from a strong, diversified soil with a lot of biological life, but also with minerals and other building blocks of the food that we eat. Myself, as a farmer, I look at my opportunity when I get a seed in my hand. It is to allow that seed to express its full genetic potential. So that's where we get into things like an old open pollinated strain of seeds that has an inherent strength that's been bred from generation to generation, what we call an heirloom, or a modern seed that's been hybridized, like you and I are a hybrid of our two parents. A modern seed could be choosing two parents to breed a stronger, better plant. And then we go to what we call genetically modified, which is a really amazing level of evolution in our human science, where we're actually starting to move genes around. Unfortunately, I think we're right at the very beginning of that science when you read the actual details of how they use what's called the shotgun approach to shoot the genetic material into a cell's nucleus. They're not just shipping one gene, they're shipping a whole group of genes, hoping that that one will catch and express. So when we look at agroecology, we now see a path returning us to a natural system of agriculture. And basically an agroecological system is an agricultural system that's in sync and harmony with an ecological system. And one of the big areas we're seeing that right now is all the pests that are coming to California from around the world. We have just recently at the Port of Los Angeles, a cargo container was opened from China that had mechanical parts in it, but a moth had gone in there and laid its eggs and shipped this container all the way across the ocean. And when they opened it, these moths came out of the container, and they were watching for this, so they were able to capture and destroy those moths. But when they identified that moth, it would have been a significant new predator of American agriculture released right on the edge of California's agricultural system. And we have several new insects that have approached us in this way. So the industry goes and tries to find a specific arrow or missile to shoot at that pest problem. But it's really a systemic problem like human health. So the health of the farm is an exact, simile for human health. And what we have is on a farm, we want a diversified input of nutrients. We want air and water and moisture. We need a healthy system, a healthy soil, and seeds that are something we want to eat. The same is true of our human ecosystem. We're beginning to recognize that our human ecosystem is something that we have to cultivate. The young lady that I mentioned earlier, who I want to help get strong for this amazing journey to go to New Zealand, she's in her 4 weeks, she's had several, now 2 already groups of antibiotics, and she was telling me how she's going to go back to the doctor to get antibiotics yet again. Mm. And I was saying, you also have to start to feed the replenishment of your body's biota, like eating a living cultured yogurt and building this strength, because she's so weak that she can't fight these things off. So when we look at the agricultural system, an agroecological system is one that's intimately linked with many different parts. So every landscape of farming, they try to make it as wide and flat as possible. But there is a water drainage there. If it rains on that land, it has to go someplace. Where that goes is now a riparian system. That riparian system supports life. In a lot of places, they spray chemicals on that and have killed it historically. Well, now we're telling the farmers you can't do that. You actually have to push your cultivation back away from the edges of the riparian environment and have what we call filter strips that catch the chemicals coming off the farm before they get into the aquatic system. And so an agroecological system intensifies all those connections. It recultivates nature on the edges of the fields and through the center of the fields. We encourage birds to be present. We build the life of the soil. So we have a whole ecology that's growing our food.
The life of the soil. I've been reading Mel Bartholomew's Square Foot Gardening recently.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You recommended it actually when you were visiting, and so I've been reading it, and it's amazing. I mean, we brought organic composted soil from this delightful place that you had recommended down in San Diego County, and so our raised beds are fine, but then we have clay-like soil, and it's like here I am, a doctor, reading this stuff, going, holy crap, I don't know anything. And there's this whole science to soil and soil fixation, and and one of the things that he mentions in this book is early on when you first start gardening, everyone thinks that you just go buy a bunch of fertilizer and chuck it in the soil. soil. And effectively what that does is it creates an imbalance because you need organic matter. You need the humus, if you would. And so let's talk about how, if someone wanted to get into some, you know, the novelty slash maybe the necessity of gardening now, what that would look like in terms of what your average person could do and how they can get started with a basic home garden. Because I think this is an important piece to spin out from the movie, is how to get your hands in the dirt.
Well, I think that you're right on target, because even if we take the simplest step, I tell people that I can turn anybody into a farmer in 1 week and you can harvest your first crop. And all you need is enough space to hold a magazine on the counter of your kitchen, because you can have 4 quart jars of sprouts. And if you start sprouts every 4 to 7 days, you can even have a continuous supply depending upon the variety of sprout. But since you mentioned hummus as a simile for humus, we'll go with hummus for a moment. I love chickpeas. They're a wonderful leguminous crop that provide a protein source as well as fiber and all sorts of other nutrients. And I like hummus, which generally we soak the beans and then we boil the beans to cook them down to where we can crush them into a paste. But you can also make a sprouted hummus with just 2 or 3 days of sprouting, and you'll actually activate much more of the inherent nutrition, because the seed is designed as a storage body, but when the seed sprouts, it transforms in one of the most miraculous things that nature does. So a little hummus seed that's swelled up with moisture and is sent out a root has about double the available nutrition as this original seed. And it's like, wow, how's that possible? But it is the chemical reaction starting to go and the growth process happening. And we have many places throughout human history where we've used sprouted seeds. But one of the classic ones is in the making of malt, which goes into beverages for kids or adults, or into beer or other beverages, where they actually sprout the barley for a couple of days, and then they might toast it or dry it and then use it. So it's changed nutritionally. So all this means, how do we get a family to start growing? Well, the very first step to give them confidence and to give them a first crop to enjoy is to try sprouting. Like a cup of garbanzo beans in a cup of water, soak overnight, and then the next day you drain that water off, and then you start rinsing the seeds and keeping them moist in the jar. But the jar can be open with like a cap, a ventilated cap, or a piece of cheesecloth. And twice a day we rinse those seeds to get them moist and carry away the waste products, and they'll sprout. But when we go to a garden, a lot of my students at the Seeds at City program in San Diego, where I teach at City College, live in very tiny spaces. So they might have just a windowsill or a tiny little deck. So there we get them started on container gardening. So if you just have space on a windowsill, you might be able to have 3 or 4 6-inch pots, each with a different herb in it, like a chive plant, a thyme plant, a parsley plant. These you can harvest and use directly in your food very quickly, and they're wonderful. If you have a little more space for maybe 1 gallon to 5 gallon pots on that little tiny balcony or something, then you can grow many different pots, or many different plants in those pots. And then the ultimate is, do we have a place where we can either create soil or use the soil that's available? Like in your garden, we put in boxes for raised beds. Well, the boxes aren't absolutely necessary, because once soil gets moist, it'll hold itself up in a raised bed, but they add beauty and they help it become an outdoor room, which is essential, because the meditative part of farming is one of the most valuable pieces. It's not just the fact that you get to eat the food. It's the fact that your body and mind get to be in harmony with this growing life force that is going to feed you. I believe there's a lot there. So when we think about a family, maybe they have space for a dining table someplace outside their house. So a space as large as a dining table, maybe 3 feet wide by 4 or 6 feet long, could make one growing spot. It could either be in the ground, it could be in containers, it could be in a raised bed. Those are more site-specific challenges. But the goal is that we build the soil that's there by bringing organic matter to it. In the case of your garden, we brought soil that already had organic matter added to it in a balance, and nutrients. So it had a nutrient-rich compost and organic matter and soil particles. And we brought those together, and now we're growing them in your garden. And there's going to be a cycle. That soil, even though it comes from a really good organic compost yard, still needs to develop its own biolife. That you mentioned earlier, one of my clients, the family from Switzerland, their garden with that same soil is now 4 years old. And each year between crops, I've added extra compost, but also earthworm castings and other organic fertilizers. So this year when I went to open that garden up, it was amazing how many earthworms and what the soil biolife was. We've created a rich new environment. And in your garden, we're stepping to build that, but we're not there yet. So the first crop will be a little more challenged because all the different pieces are coming together. But each successive crop will get better and better and stronger and stronger.
Let's talk about composting for a second, because for us, we talked about whether we do the earthworm farm or the composting and what the difference would be for biomass and all that. I really like the idea of composting in general, just because then people have a better connection with what they're wasting and what food is left over. And how does that tie in? Assuming most people don't know too much about gardening in general, how does that tie in with how the soil builds out that rhizosphere, as we mentioned in the movie?
Well, composting is kind of taking a natural process and bringing it to a more compact form. So think of the forest floor. As leaves come down off of trees, they generally land on the forest floor. Moisture is added from a rain, and they start to decompose and build the soil. If you've ever been to a spot where the leaves are really thick and pulled it back, there'll be leaves that look almost like they just fell, and then leaves that are starting to turn black and decompose. And then down at the bottom, the leaves will almost be unrecognizable, and the soil will be there, and it'll be this rich and healthy environment. So what we do when we're composting is we save all the organic materials we create on our property. So it doesn't have to just be the kitchen. It can be weeds that you pull in the garden. It can be trimmings from trees or shrubs that you have around your garden. All these things can be brought together and basically piled up. So on a farm, we work to create a compost pile that reaches a critical mass and heats up. And the classic one is a biodynamic compost pile. They make it 12 feet by 12 feet, and they layer various forms of organic matter as well as very rich, nutrient-rich things like dairy compost. And they'll make layers like a Viennese cake and then moisten this whole mass. And the biology will take over and heat up this mass to like 160 degrees. And decomposition on many different tropic levels will be taking place. At the highest heat, that drives away a lot of the smaller microorganisms, but it sterilizes any of the diseases that might have been in that plant material. It kills any insect eggs, and it kills other pollutants. So a classic compost can come in kind of two ways. One, what we call the commercial compost that's encouraged to heat up. And for organic certification, we heat that compost up, take its temperature, turn the compost, heat it up again, and it takes 5 times where it reaches the temperature of 160 degrees over a period of weeks to really compost that material aggressively. What it does, though, is it takes the nutrients and it actually stabilizes them in a form that the plants can use. Whereas at first, those nutrients might be released in a gaseous form where they burn right off into the atmosphere. So using dairy manure as a example, when it's fresh, it's very fragrant, it's filled with biolife, and the fragrance is ammonia compounds that are burning off, and those ammonia compounds are actually nutrients potentially. So when we build that into a compost pile, there's a chemical reaction that stabilizes those ammonia compounds. A good rich compost, when you smell it when it's finished, hardly has any fragrance at all. None of the strong biting fragrances. It's only that rich kind of humus forest floor smell. So at home, we're better able to do what I call a cool compost pile, where as we collect the ingredients, we decide on a location in our garden because the weight builds up pretty rapidly. And then sometimes we contain it. There are some that are like little, they're tanks that are in a frame that you can turn with a crank and you put in the organic matter, different types of composters that are pre-made for you. Those can be very interesting. The ones that I've found that if you're not careful, you can put too much weight in the turning mechanism, won't allow you to use it. The very simplest is just to take a simple wire ring, a piece of chicken wire or other wire, make it about 3 to 4 feet across, and then just layer in all the organic material that comes through your yard and your kitchen. We put into that and we cover it. We want a mixture of materials, and then we moisten it because it's a biological function. If the pile dries out, the biological function closes down to almost a stop. If the pile is at the right moisture, it's a vibrant community of activities and hundreds of microorganisms working away to break down and stabilize those nutrients.
That's fantastic. How much work does it take to do this? I mean, aside from running out there and chucking some food and some peels out there, I mean, how often do you need to tend to this thing to keep it alive and keep it going?
Well, I like the average week calendar. So if you take something out to your compost pile maybe 3 times during the week, you might have a little covered container in the kitchen, and if you peel some potatoes and cut up some things, you get a couple of handfuls in there. After about 2 days, that's starting to get pretty fragrant in the container. So, 1 to 2 days you can collect, then you take out and add the compile. If you have, for example, a resource that you've saved of dried leaves and you're putting fresh things from the kitchen, you can put down a layer of these fresh things and then maybe put a few handfuls of dried leaves over them and then give it a squirt of water so that the pile stays moist. The pile should also be able to drain. You do not want the pile to get to be wet, to be like a swamp, because then you'll have anaerobic digestion rather than aerobic digestion. So a compost pile is something that works with aerobic digestion. It has air coming in from the sides. That's the simplest way to do the job at home, is just to create a cool pile, let it pile up. It might get 3 or 4 feet high, and you can take the wire ring off and move to the next one. And you've moistened it, so over a period of time, the outside shell of that will not have decomposed because you didn't turn it. So we carve the outside shell off and put it in the new compost pile, and then you'll have a core of humus that's been broken down that may still have some bigger fibrous parts in it, but then we run that through a screen and use it to make transplant soil, to feed our plants, or to give to friends as a precious gift.
And it really is. I mean, we've had so many interviews with people talking about why it's so important to connect the good bacteria in the soil with the food, with our guts, and so on and so forth, right? And so this is the root of it, though. I mean, we're at this point we're talking about health care at its like primal origins, really. And
absolutely,
the life in the soil is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if we don't have a connection to living food, you know, if all the food we get is dry or canned, we can still survive, but our whole physical system will probably be challenged because the building blocks of many of our essential nutrients and byproducts of our body's chemistry are not being fed. There's an absence of all the building blocks, and that's a very critical thing. One of the big questions that's going on right now is whether organic food is in any way nutritionally different from conventionally grown food. And on one hand, I would hope that there was no nutritional difference, and that the only difference was that no toxic compounds were used that might leave residue that would go into my body. But some of the studies have shown that organically grown food might have a greater, richer amount of mineral nutrients in it, for example, or other phytonutrients. And we believe that that comes from the living soil that supports it. On a conventional agriculture farm, we just watched our neighbor here who's a conventional farmer, and he had a company come in. He prepared his fields for strawberry planting, and he had a company come in and they put plastic over the whole field and inject methyl bromide gas to sterilize the soil down 18 inches deep. And the plastic holds the gas in for a few days so that it kills all the soil biolife. And their goal is to eliminate disease-causing organisms, but at the same time, they create a complete neutral environment where nothing living is there. So the things that flow back in tend to be out of balance. And what we're looking for is a balanced ecological system. Just like looking at a human is, when you're looking at a human for their health, you're looking at a balanced system. If you look at their eyes and they're severely jaundiced, you know, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, there's a signal that the eyes are giving me that there's something going on in the blood chemistry here with this person. Or, you know, we think about like a vibrant color in our face, and when somebody's had a shock and they're in shock, it's as if the blood drains from the face and they're almost pasty white, you know. Well, the body is using the blood someplace else to deal with a critical need, and there's this indicator going on, you know. After a traffic accident, you know, people are in shock. Their body is going through several different things from this shocking experience, and sometimes they're still trying to be conscious and act in a safe way, and they may have lost that temporarily, and we need to restore it. It tends to come back quicker with the mind than with the body in our health system.
So let me ask you this. So in human systems, when we have, say, a 10-day bout of amoxicillin, or go on CIP, or some sort of strong antibiotic, and wipe out all of the microbiota as much as we could to get the bad guys out, then we have this tendency towards having other types of species being able to supplant and move into the neighborhoods that have now been cleared out. And we have all kinds of problems, epidemic level of problems that we're seeing in our modern culture. relate this, if you can, I don't know if this is a one-to-one correlation, but what ends up happening to the field that gets dumped with the methyl bromide gas and, you know, completely sterilized of all microbiota? Are we seeing tendencies towards other weeds and other diseases and other things that are causing kind of similar reflections of what we would see in the human body?
You hit the nail right on the head, because one of the critical things is with our human body, we now are coming to understand that the biota, especially in our gut, is a critical part to both processing our food, making it available to us, controlling invading organisms. That's, you know, I've read recently that somewhat of 80% of the key function of our body is in our digestive tract. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So we think about it, we're going to get this, we got this bad bacteria, because they don't help with viruses, but antibiotics are good at bacteria. So this bad bacteria gets in through a wound or something, and we really need to hit it with the strongest weapon that we have. And so we give you this amoxicillin, let's say, for 10 days, and you have to stay on the regime. You know, you feel better the second day. They say, no, you need to continue to take it to completely eliminate this problem from your system. But at the same time, the collateral damage is that now you've eliminated your digestive system. All the life in your digestive tract has possibly been washed out and killed. So we need to effectively rebuild that, to strengthen the person and enable them to start digesting properly again. The same thing happens on the farm. When this conventional farmer treats his land with ethyl bromide to sterilize it, and then comes in and starts using chemical nutrition, he's only using a few of the key building blocks of a real food system. You know, we now have come to understand that the biolife of the soil is significant in its contribution to the quality of the food grown in the soil. So the soil biolife can be two basic areas: soil bacteria and soil mycology, or the mycelium of fungi species. And a really healthy soil has a balance of these. If it's more acid, it tends to the more bacteria side. If it's more alkaline, it tends to the more mycelium side. So those mycelium, for example, can dissolve minerals. I mean, they can wrap their little hyphae around a particle of minerals and secrete acids that will dissolve and make available those nutrients. And then the root hairs and the hyphae have a direct interaction. You know, the hyphae will grow right into the root hairs and will deliver the minerals to the plant. And at the same time, the plant's doing photosynthesis and is delivering glucose to the fungi. So it's a symbiotic relationship. In natural systems, all the way from agroecology over here to just the simplest bit of our human health, we are symbiotic systems. You know, you depend upon a farmer because you're working at your doctor's office. So the farmer is a part of your symbiotic system to provide, you know, the vegetables of your table. Another farmer maybe produces the fruit of your table, and another produces another key component of it, maybe eggs, for example. Without all those support systems, then you're at your office going, you know, I wonder what a Band-Aid tastes like. You know, is there any nutrition in?
I'm so tired of eating gauze.
Right. You know, it's like, so in a way to explain how the chemical nutritional system works is they tend to put what we call molecular level, or on the level of specific molecules like nitrogen. We used to believe that plants could only uptake these compounds on what we call the molecular level, so just the base compounds. But we've now come to discover that plants can actually uptake very long chain compounds, you know, polysaccharides and other things blended together. But it's this molecular level that's the critical thing, because the plants live in a healthy system that supplies them with all the available tools they need to express the genetic potential, well, you're getting the best possible plant, which is then feeding you the best possible nutrition. On the chemical farm, it's a little like all we get on our diet is rice and beans. You know, they have the liquid nitrogen and the liquid phosphorus and potassium. So we could survive if all we had, you know, for a month, for you and I, was a 50-pound bag of rice and a 50-pound bag of beans. And we could say, okay, we're going to break this into weekly lots, and then we're going to break it down how much each day and how much at 3 meals. But boy, by the end of the first week, you and I are going to be going, you know, maybe some herb or something just to flavor it. You know, just the plain rice and the plain beans right now are getting very boring. Well, plants feed just like humans. They want a diversity of nutrients, not just these 2 key nutrients. So it's one of the other examples is if you took a bath in something to get 1 sip, and then you empty the bathtub. So when they put chemical nutrition on the ground and then water it, it liquefies those chemical salts. And if they water too much, it can wash them right by the plant. So the plant has one really heavy dose. Oh, here, I'm grabbing it, you know, and taking in as much as it can. And then over the next several days, as they're still available, it's taking in what it can, but it goes down back to almost zero very quickly with each watering. Well, that's like the beans and the rice. If we've been building the life of the soil and we have organic matter which holds nutrients as well as moisture in the soil and supports the biolife, well, then we have a different soil. It's a different environment. It's a different thing altogether. And so it's kind of like growing our food in these 2 different places. You know, way out in the middle of the super dry desert, well, we can get something to grow there. Or in this rich environment where we've been building organic matter and building our soil for 10 years or 20 years, well, that garden is going to feed you so much more successfully than this new garden in the middle of nowhere.
You know, this reminds me a lot of the conversations that we have about deforestation and the reason why that's a problem, in that when you have the canopy of trees, then you have all of the biomass that falls under the trees that creates that insulation so that nature can take its course, and then you have life underneath the trees, and you have a robust ecosystem of life happening in forests. And, you know, by us coming in and deforesting areas and then replanting trees and trying to get all cute with it, we've damaged the soil to a point where it's just darn near hard to grow. And then we come at it with chemicals trying to fix it. And you know, again, it's just rice and beans on everything. So it's such a wise system that we've stumbled away from in our drunken stupor with technological advancements, that it's really refreshing to hear how quickly it's coming, and thank God for guys like you who are, you know, lineage holders and are, you know, helping us remember this and bring it back. I want people watching this to know where to go from here in terms of like, okay, look, if I got this much, you know, space, then I'll do something on my terrace versus I got a little bit of room in the backyard. I'll fence off the dogs and give this a go. Where would you recommend people start? I know sprouting is a big thing. From there, getting into the dirt and you know, do you go to your Home Depot? Like, where do you even go to start doing this stuff?
Well, I would say in a couple of places. One of the things is changing our consciousness about the food. And one of the best places to do that is to go to a farmer's market, because there you can actually talk to the people that have been involved in the production of the food. Whereas in the supermarket, you see the food and there's a wonderful person or two in the produce department that knows something about it, but they weren't really responsible for it. So the first stage is educating yourself. Like, go to the farmer's market, buy some different things, taste some different things, get to know what's going on. But we have a tremendous amount of available resources to start organic gardening. There are wonderful books like Bartholomew's book on square foot gardening. John Jevons is one of the longtime names in agroecology and what we call bio-intensive agriculture. His book, How to Grow More Food Than You Ever Thought Possible, Than Less Space Than You Can Imagine. He talks about how a family, a person could, with 1,400 square feet, raise their complete annual diet. And so his work is focused on to what would it take to raise this, what we call a minimum diet, because it's a survival diet and it's a lot of choices are in it. But what we're looking to do is to inspire people to supplement the food that they're getting and to reprogram their thinking about that food. So, going to your library and looking for home gardening books, going online to stores like Amazon or others. There's actually a really vibrant marketplace in used books that I buy over Amazon. I recently had to get a new textbook for my class, so I was able to go and buy books that were like a penny a piece plus shipping. So like $5, I'd get these books. One of them even got airmailed from England for that price. And there's a rich diversity of information in these books that helps to program our mind around the thinking. But really, it's the person going out in their backyard. And we did this with you over the phone. I had you go out in your backyard and look around and describe to me what was going on and what space was available. And you had a space where you had tried to grow a lawn and it wasn't working because of the very difficult soil. And so we talked that through and said, gosh, if we go with raised boxes here and improve soil on top and bring the irrigation from the lawn up into the boxes so you can have a specialized irrigation for each box, now you've got the space and the medium, the soil and the water, and then the work becomes the fun part for you. You can plant seeds directly. You can buy transplants and plant those. You can develop a sense of first what your favorite things are to grow. Maybe it would be, I love salads, so I like to have a lot of different things on my salad. I might grow 6 different types of lettuce and French sorrel and chives and onions and peppers and tomatoes and cucumbers and have this wonderful salad garden. But we can learn about our own diet as well by growing, because we tend to be people of habit. We'll eat things that we were introduced to as a younger child or as an adult, and we'll shy away from foods that we don't know. Kohlrabi is a very unusual vegetable in the cabbage family that forms a fruit the size of an apple above the ground. And you hand one of these to people and they're like, what's that? What do you do with it? But if you peel it and slice it, and it's like the texture of an apple, but tastes like a sweet broccoli, they're like, wow, what can you do with it? You mentioned one of my clients is a musician, and he had this Christmas party that he's doing this Christmas, and he said, I want to serve, I'm bringing my whole family to my house for Christmas, and I want to serve fresh corn from my garden. And I'm like, oh, 10 people. He says, no, 50. So it's like, oh, well, we need to create a bigger garden. So we expanded his garden, and we planted on September 3rd our first succession of corn, and then 3 weeks later we planted our second. Now that's pretty late in the year, but we looked on the packet and we selected a corn that was a 60 to 65 day corn. In the midsummer, some of our classic corn varieties might take 90 to 120 days. So we planted this corn, and on Saturday I harvested 150 ears out of his garden, and he was back in town, and I sent him a message. I said, fresh corn's being served in the garden. And he came out, and I handed him one of these ears I had just picked, and he bit into it, and the juice came out around his mouth. It's really messy. And he was like, why would people ever even cook corn if it tastes this good right off the plant? And I said, well, the reason they cook it is that very few people can take it right off the plant and eat it. The rest of us have to wait. So we use heating as a way to make food more palatable. We might add spice like salt or pepper or butter to make it more palatable. But we're just working to recreate how wonderful it was right off the plant.
Wow.
And he was like, wow. You know, and I took and I gave him a pickling cucumber, a white pickling cucumber to eat, and 2 string beans. And so he's got a handful of morning fresh food, and he's vegan. So he was in heaven because the flavors and the textures were so exciting for him.
That's beautiful. That's really it right there. And for anyone watching this, I wish you will have that experience at some point very soon. And we're going to put we did a great bonus video with you for the Success Kit when you came out here. And I'd love to get some more just quick ideas about how to quick start your garden from you so that we can build it into the Success Kit of the Summit. And we're going to keep following you, man. I love what you're doing, Scott. You've been instrumental. I mean, you've helped direct my own home garden, so you're feeding my family here. And it's just been wonderful. So how do people find you? What's the best way to find you?
Well, our business is called Murray Farms. Our brand name is called Edge of Urban Farms. You can search us. We have a website, Edge of Urban Farms. And one of the ways that I help people is through my consulting work. Sometimes it's just like over the phone, helping them to visualize and see what they have. Other times it's with a site visit where we do what we call a site assessment. We come out and we look at what they have. What do we got to work with here? How could we make this work for you? And how could we design it so that you could actually accomplish it? You know, maybe you do the work yourself, maybe you hire somebody to do the work for you, but the key is baskets of food appearing in the kitchen on a regular basis. And that's one of the things we do with our business. Plus, we design gardens for schools and institutions. We specialize in what we call agriculture in the built space, of designing farms that fit right next to the built space, because we've been building things and destroying our farms. And I believe we have to bring them back together. So at schools especially, but you know, think about it, a hospital. Shouldn't a hospital have a farm around it where the thought of being healthy is coming from the outside in? And we help people with organic certification, transitioning their farms from being conventional to organic and getting certified and getting into the marketplace.
That's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, a living, breathing hero, Scott Murray, you're an awesome man. Thank you for doing what you do, and I'm going to get some of the quick start stuff into the Success Kit for everyone so that they can understand basically how to get going from whether it's sprouts to, you know, some serious square footage in the garden. So thank you very much. We're out of time, and we could do this for days and days, but I'm gonna keep following you through the Victory Gardens, and we'll do tons more here. So thanks again.
Well, and thank you for recognizing me as a luminary. That's quite an honor.
Oh, you were right up there with everyone else in there, because you're at the ground level of all this. You're feeding us.
Well, and remember, it's no longer the old saying of you are what you eat. It's really becoming you are what you eat eats. So if your food is grown with things that you wouldn't want to touch or be associated with, think about that.
Love that. You are what you eat eats.
You are what you eat eats.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.